Hi everyone, I am recording a screencast video lecture on Module 3, focusing on the peer review of the instruction manual early draft and then the final submission of the instruction manual, which is due at the end of the Module 3 week. What I've got here is what you're doing for Module 3, and this is going to happen twice, this peer review. It's going to happen first with the instruction manual, and then after this, it's going to happen with the um, technical report down here, which is the next major assignment in the course. But anyways, I'm going to start. There's a couple readings that you should be doing for this week to help facilitate your understanding of how to engage in best practices of what we call peer review or peer feedback, because there are specific ways of doing this. And my experience with peer feedback is quite extensive. It goes back many, many years, and it's not something that students are, or at least in my experience, are very comfortable doing, and a lot of time. And I've done a lot of research on it and have written some papers on it. But generally what happens is, a student views their instructor as kind of the authority or expert on feedback and grading, and they tend to trust their classmates less. And so first there's that problematic dynamic when students are asked to provide peer feedback, but also students sometimes don't know how to provide feedback. So what are ways that you can give what's called the facilitative feedback, which is in one of the reading assignments, versus summative feedback. So how to provide constructive and useful feedback versus feedback that is ultimately not useful for the writer. And this is also something that teachers, particularly teachers who teach writing, are very well versed in, because we spend many years training and engaging in discussions of, how do we provide not only effective feedback, but how do we provide effective feedback in a short period of time, because when you're grading writing and you're providing feedback on it, you're often told to do it within a 15-minute time period, and that's usually because you have so many things to get through. So I've facilitated a lot of workshops for instructors and also for TAs or graduate assistants who teach on how to provide effective feedback. But I've also spent a lot of time engaging in peer feedback. So that's when, peers are reviewing each other's work. And the reason I think peer review is really helpful is because even though students tend to view the instructor as an authority on grading and feedback, students also have a type of authority and expertise and are able to provide effective feedback because you yourself are engaging in that same assignment. So you should be aware of the criteria of the assignment. So when you're looking at your peers' papers, you should know, okay, well, I know that the assignment calls for, X, Y, and Z. I see that, this classmate of mine seems to be struggling or forgetting to do, this thing, and then trying to then provide writing, or feedback that helps your classmates and points that out to your classmates so that they can then take that constructive criticism and enact that during the revision process. So the reason we do peer review is for multiple reasons. One is to kind of implicitly tell students, hey, you have autonomy and you do have authority on the subject because you yourself are writing this particular thing or conducting this project. I am not. So I know what to look for, and I know the criteria, and I know how to give feedback because that's my job, but You also, as students who are doing this project, also have a level of autonomy and an authority because you should be familiar with the assignment criteria. So, and then feedback is also a way of testing your knowledge of, not just your knowledge, but your knowledge and understanding of a particular project. So, in order to provide effective feedback on a classmate's assignment, you yourself have to be familiar with, or you it might realize what we call knowledge gaps in your own understanding of the assignment. So, in order for you to be able to effectively provide feedback on a peer's paper, you have to engage with the criteria on a deeper level. And so it challenges your understanding of not just the assignment, but the various criteria for the assignment. And so you might realize, okay, wait, if this is what my classmate has. I'm not sure if it's totally right. Let me go back and relook at the assignment criteria. So it's also kind of a way to test any knowledge gaps or need for clarification that students have of an individual assignment. So there's a lot of reasons why we do peer review. My excuse me, my holistic experience with peer feedback is that students don't like it. And mostly that's because they don't, in my experience, they haven't found, or they tend not to find, when you're weighing a peer's feedback versus an instructor feedback, they tend to invalidate their peers' feedback in place of the instructor's feedback because the instructor is seen as an authority figure for obvious reasons. So, but I encourage you all to not just look at my feedback, and you'll get a note on your assignment on your early draft once I provide that feedback, but also take your peers' feedback into your revision consideration, because they also have a voice, and all of you have a voice, and all of you have or should have an understanding of the assignment. And if you don't, then you should definitely reach out to me and ask me some questions. So, okay, anyway, sorry, that's just kind of my justification for like why we do peer review, because sometimes students don't understand it, they just don't like it, they kind of dismiss it. But I am of the school that believes in the practice of peer review for particular pedagogical reasons. So anyways, let's get on to some of the reading that you're asked to do this week. So, and I think I've opened up the various readings that you've been asked to do. So you do have a chapter this week. It's not under this one that I just clicked. This one is asking you to look at this video by Dan Richards and some readings by Joe Moxley. I used to work with both of them, so they know what they're talking about. And these 3 items by Moxley I did open. So these are the questions to consider. So this is about questions to consider when you're providing feedback for one of your classmates' papers. This is what we call a heuristic, and a heuristic is applicable to really anything. It's really just questions you ask yourself to assess quality control. So you can do that. I highly encourage you to do heuristics for your own work, but it's also, of course, then useful when you're doing heuristics in the peer review process. So for example, right, and then this is broken down into classifications, right? So we have focus. Focus is usually the overall completion of the assignment. So is what is submitted fulfilling the actual assignment, what the actual assignment is asking? That's focus. And then there's evidence, right? So what are those outside sources that the student is bringing in or your classmate is bringing in? Are they credible sources? Are they actually being effectively integrated? That means, is the student referring to them as a way to let the reader know, let their audience know, this is how this outside evidence, including visuals, are being used to help clarify whatever point you're trying to communicate. Organization, or what we call methodology. So this is the method to how you choose to organize your work. Is there logic to it? Does it make sense to the reader? Why do you choose to bring this information here and follow it with this piece of information and then follow that with that piece of information? What is the logic behind your choices for doing those things? Does it make sense? Do you make proper transitions? So it's kind of what people tend to call the quote unquote flow of a project or a paper, any type of writing. Is it written, is it organized in a way that makes sense? So what you don't want is for your reader, including me, because I am one of your reader and I just also happen to be a grader, is you don't want me saying, well, I don't understand how you got to this point. Like, you mentioned this here, but then it just kinds of, you don't then mention again until, 4 things later. So what's the purpose of that? Okay. And then style gets into kind of what we call the lower order. So what are those sentence level things like? And like I talked about in one of my previous video lecture, is the importance of grammar, particularly in technical writing, because we're dealing with shorter documents, and not necessarily just shorter documents, but documents that use technical writing. So writing that is not verbose, it's not wordy, it's not, a lot of times it's written in bullet points or short paragraphs. Instruction manual can be, 200 pages long, but then ultimately the way it's written is very different than academic writing. So that's why our style and grammar are going to be really important, because if you're not considering those things in your writing, it's going to be more confusing for your reader, because there's less text and there's less qualification, what we call description, in the writing, and then B, just because of the Spartan nature, or the less verbose nature of technical writing, these types of things stick out more clearly when there's stylistic problems. And then format, right? Making sure you're using that APA formatting, making sure your instruction manual formatting makes sense in terms of what an instruction manual should look like. And then when you're writing memos, like the reflection memo that comes at the end of the instruction manual for your final submission, making sure that memo is in appropriate memo format. So this is a really good heuristic for taking you through some of the things. Not everything in these is going to be useful for you. Like, some of it has to do with, is it organized in classical argumentation, or is it organized with Rogerian argumentation? Like, those don't apply to you. So some of them won't apply, but a lot of them will apply for you. And then some of the other readings, right? So these 7 tips for responding to writing, and this is the document review guidelines. So this is, I think the first one is really crucial, this idea of providing I hate that word. I don't hate it, I just can never say it. Facilitative as opposed to summative evaluations. So facilitative evaluations, and just read evaluations as feedback or review. That's all that means. But when you provide feedback that is constructive, you're helping to facilitate the writer's ability to engage in productive revision. So a summative evaluation is basically just summarizing. It's just saying, oh, hey, yeah, you have a thing that says this. And then if I'm the writer and you tell me that, it's like, great, I don't need you to tell me what I already did. That's not helpful for me to figure out what I need to do to make this piece of writing better. That's why we want to steer away from summative evaluations. If you are going to provide anything summative, you should follow it up with something facilitative. So you might say, whereas, in this section of the instruction manual, you do X, you might want to do something, 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 and then provide some ideas for the writer as to, what they might want to do when they go through their revision process in a way that will be helpful, ultimately helpful for them. And to go along with that, I do have, and I did upload this in the handouts and resources module in Canvas. So you'll see this is the instruction manual student sample that I have. I uploaded the PowerPoint for chapter 4, which is for this week. And I have this peer feedback schematic. And the peer feedback schematic is a schematic, let me make that a little bit bigger. It's a schematic of different types of peer feedback, and it's not going to say on the schematics, but I'll try to point out which ones are more preferable than other ones. But it basically says, like, when we do feedback, sometimes you can point, sometimes you can advise, you can collaborate, you can announce, you can react, you can elicit, or you can question. So some of these are, you know, these different types of providing feedback. Some of them are facilitative, and then some of them are not helpful at all. They're not necessarily summative, they're just pointless. So, for example, and I engage in a variety of them just because of time restrictions. I don't necessarily always have the time I want, so I'll try to focus more complex feedback. So more complex feedback are things like collaborating is a really facilitative, productive type of feedback. And this is where the reviewer, so say I'm providing feedback on your paper, so I would be the reviewer. So and this is asynchronous, obviously, so I don't work directly with you, although that's always a good situation when you can work really collaboratively with somebody. And this is, I think the better name for this instead of collaborating is I tend to use the word modeling. And this is where you show through writing yourself how somebody might, how the person you're reviewing might reword something so that it is improved. So, and I tend to do modeling as much as I can. So I'll say, I do it less in technical writing because in my personal experience, academic writing is more convoluted, so it requires more modeling, whereas technical writing, I might only have to do modeling like once, and then because it's a very regimented type of writing, that one modeling should be sufficient, whereas in academic writing, there's so many different rhetorical intentions that you sometimes have to model all of the different rhetorical intentions. But this might be like, you know, okay, maybe, so when you're doing collaborative or modeling type feedback, you might say something like, you know, the note to the person might be, you know, you might want to rewrite this, or, you know, revise for clarity, something like, and this would be a common note I would give, you know, something like, and then I would do a model of either part of a sentence or a bullet point or a full sentence or anything like that to try to give the writer an idea of what something more effective might look like. So that's one of the most beneficial types of feedback. It is also the most difficult and also the most time consuming. Like pointing is not helpful because essentially all you're doing is you're pointing at something. So the example here is, this is not a good quote. And it's like, okay, why? So when you just point to something, like if I were to point at something and say, here's where you start, you know, or here's where you integrate a visual for the first time. It's like, okay, that's not helpful to me, and it's a waste of my time, and it's not helpful for you. It's not facilitative. Advising is helpful. I think this is a common one. It's a common one I do, and it's a common one that students do when they do peer review. A reviewer provides the writer, and there's a variety of different types of advising. I'm not going to go through everything on here. But this is basically where people start like, maybe do this, or you need more clarification with this because blank, right? Or I think you need an active verb here, or you use this verb tense here, but then you move to a different verb tense, or you are changing narrative modes, right? You're going from first person to second person, and maybe this, right? So this is a good example. This might confuse readers, but then you don't just want to say that. You want to say this might confuse readers because. Okay, I mean you can just say that, but it's even more helpful to the writer if you're able to provide some qualification as to why it would confuse readers. So that's advising is a common one. Um, the other I'm gonna not go over all of these, but eliciting and questioning are also very good. Um, I'm going to go over reacting because I can't stand reacting, and it's, I think, it's up there with pointing. It's just not very helpful at all. But questioning is the most common thing. So instructors, especially in writing, and anyone who has like a writing assignment in their course, um, are always are and this is an example is not helpful, but that's more of an advising than a questioning. I of course didn't make this schematic, but it's a good thing to point to. But typically, feedback should come in the form of questions, and that goes along with that heuristics. Is you really want to write challenge the writer in some way. So, and this is where students can get frustrated with feedback, is that they just kind of are looking for people, and this also comes from my experience with being a writing center director, is that students are oftentimes looking for people just to tell them what to do. But writing instructors and anybody in a writing center, if you go to use any writing center services at Embry-Riddle, which I highly encourage you to do because Vector has just opened, and that's something I actually am a part of. So that offers writing sessions, synchronous writing sessions. But students tend to want people to just tell them what to do. Like, just tell me what to do to fix this so I can just turn it in and get the grade. But that's counterintuitive to the learning process. So, and this is why I'm against actually mass education, because I'm very much about education is about citizen building and the learning process and the application and instruction of intellectual faculties. So, and that is using your brain, using cognitive faculties. So if we don't challenge students or writers in certain ways, then it becomes a futile attempt, or there's no real reason for it beyond the purpose of submitting the work, getting it done, finishing the class, getting your degree, and then moving on. And at the end of the day, you've wasted your time, you've wasted my time in terms of the learning environment. So this is why we want to do questioning. There are times when, I taught in a large public university for many years, and so I would be able to work with students one-on-one, and there'd be times where I would spend 2-3 hours with a student and go through their papers line by line and say, okay, what do we want to do here? What do we want to do here? What do we want to do here? Right? So I can do that. I'm not just telling them what to do, though. That's working very collaboratively with somebody. But particularly in asynchronous situations like online classes, we're not just going to, I'm just not going to tell people what to do. Sometimes I will. Sometimes I'll just be like, okay, especially if I've already like maybe posed the question before, I might just say like, okay, you need to do X, Y, and Z, right? So I might just go out and say it. But I try to make all of my feedback specific to challenging the writer in some way, because that is in theory supposed to get the writer to engage in what we call reflective revision. So it forces the writer to think about what they did, why they did it, and what they're going to do to solve the problem. And that's the type of critical thinking skills that we don't just want in the classroom, but everybody wants in the workforce as well. So questioning and eliciting is really good. Reacting is worthless because this is basically where you're just like, hey, you did great. It's not useful. I don't tend to engage in it. I've had I've taught for almost 15 years, and um, for example, overall you did a really good job. So I am pedagogically not the type of person that will just say, hey, you did a great job. And that's not because I don't think people did a good job. It's just because I don't think that type of feedback is facilitative. My feedback is always focused on, all right, you have a job. Your job is to do this project or this writing. You have opted to do this job. In order to do this, to engage in revision and make your project better, here's what you want to do. And so I tend to focus very hard on, almost myopically to the point where I'm just saying, okay, you want to work on this and this and this, rather than fluffing it up with great work, or something along those lines. And I've had a lot of, some of my closest friends are professors as well, and they do spend the time to what I would call fluffing it up, but they do say, these kind of more positive reactions to work. But it's not always positive. But and there's a very common formula that I don't practice, but some people do practice it, but I don't agree with it because I had a student pick up on it early on in my teaching career, and he had a very strong negative reaction to it. And I said, okay, I'm never doing that again. And that's what's called the feedback sandwich. So that's where you start with something good feedback, which tends to be reactive, and then you provide some facilitative, here's what you want to work on, and then you end with something good, right? So that's what we call or what writing pedagogy calls the feedback sandwich. I don't do that. So again, I don't think it's helpful. I try to be very just I'm a pretty blunt person, so I'll just say, okay, here's what you want to do. Just work on this and this and this. So, okay, I think that's enough time on the schematic, but it is available for you on Canvas if you would like to take more of a look at it, because you are being graded on your peer feedback, and students, in my experience, like I said, have struggled with peer feedback. So, and that's because they tend to be reactive and they tend to not be thoughtful or meaningful. This is not 100%. There are students who are very good at providing feedback, but this is why I'm spending a little bit more time to talk about the importance of feedback and kind of how to do it. Okay, so those are the readings. I didn't look at all of them, but there's the 3 readings from Moxley, the video by Dan Richards. The chapter 4 comes under here, the style of technical writing. So, and like I said, I uploaded a PowerPoint for that. So you can, you should read through the chapter. And if you also want to look through the PowerPoint, you can. And then you have the final submission of your instruction manual. Before I get to that, I'm just going to take a quick look at, I always have a test student in this is called the speed grader. And this is what you'll all see when, I'm guessing it looks like mine, when you're doing peer review for a classmate. And this is what I use for anything that's not like a discussion, any type of file upload you provide. I use the speed grader. So what you want to do is the assignment, this is a test student, so obviously there's nothing uploaded. But if there were something uploaded, it would be in this area here. And there are tools that would pop up, that would populate when there is an assignment uploaded. And you're welcome to use those, because those are what I use. So I'll use like the highlight tool or the comment tool. I think those are the 2. Occasionally I'll use the strikeout tool, but I tend to use the highlight and the comment tools the most. So you should feel free to use the speed grader tools that will be in here to directly mark up your classmate's paper. And this is the rubric for, this is how I think it will look by default. And so what you want to do, and I'm showing you this because this is where students always don't do this and then they lose points on the peer review grade. Assignment comments is where you want to put your endnote. So that's part of the peer review assignment. You need to click view rubric to actually view the rubric and what are called the rubric elements. And so if you remember from what I think I sent in the announcement I had about peer feedback, about the peer review and the instruction manual, I quote from the criteria of the peer review assignment, where you need to make notes in every one of the peer review elements. So each of these boxes, and these are very similar to what we looked at in here, these classifications, and that's very normal in writing. So they're broken down into assignment requirements, focus, evidence, organization, mechanics, and style and formatting, almost identical. And what you need to do is I'm just going to say it here. So this is what you do. You have to first view the rubric, and you have to click comment, or you have to click that little comment icon, and that will open up a space for you to leave a comment. And because the part of the peer review assignment is that you provide a comment in each of the rubric elements that are specific to that rubric element. So, for example, this rubric element is assignment requirements, and then it shows here, right, these are the different points that the person can get for the final submission. So you would want your comment here to be specific to the overall assignment. And this is easy because the early draft does not ask you to do all of the things that are being asked in the final submission. So you could be like, where are your visuals, right? So you're going to have plenty of things to say there. It'll get a little bit more complicated, like in focus, right? And so you want to read through the various points. Right, so the highest points, clearly articulated thesis topic, and that's because there should be an introduction to the manual, like an introductory paragraph that provides context, a thesis statement, who the audience is, those types of things that are talked about in the reading. But ideas are clearly articulated and compelling, cogent analysis of relevant subject and concepts, and I don't think I've stated this before, and if I have, I'm just going to say it again. When we have rubric areas like this that have like information, semicolon, information, semicolon, information, semicolon, when I'm grading, say I believe you have a clearly articulated thesis or topic, but I don't think you have cogent analysis of relevant subject and concepts, that's when I'm going to bump you down to 16 points. Or if for some reason your thesis and topic statement is super, like, amazingly articulated, I might give like 17 or 18 points. But just because you might have one thing, and if you don't have another, that's when you start getting bumped down. So if you have all of these things, then you'll get the 20 points. But if like I said, like maybe you have cogent analysis, but you don't have any topic or thesis statement, maybe you forgot your introduction, you're going to be bumped down, to who knows, depending on what it is. So you want to go to this comment box for every element. Make sure you're reading through the different points. Again, that will be helpful for you to understand the grading. And then you want to write a thoughtful, meaningful endnote. So if you want to start with something reactive, again, that's not how I do it, but you have your own autonomy in providing feedback, so I'm not going to say don't do it. But you can say like, great job, I thought your topic was really interesting, and then go into here are places you want to work on, and then, that facilitative type of feedback that will be ultimately helpful in the revision for the student knowing that you thought their topic was interesting. That does not help them improve their work, though you can say that. I won't, but that's me, and people can all give feedback in their own particular way. So that's the rubric and the, where you want to put the end note and all of that stuff, for when you actually do peer review. And then again, feeling free to use the speed grader tools to actually mark on the student paper. And I think that was all. Yes. The last thing I'm going to talk about is just the final submission with the reflection memo. So this talks about your final submission. So right, the early draft was like, I think it was 5 steps, if I remember correctly, 10 steps where you provide qualification or description in 5 of them. So that's all you had to do. For your final, right, incorporating instructor feedback, so you'll be getting that from me within the next few days. You have to have at least 10 individual steps detailing how to accomplish a technical task of your choosing, which you all have done so far. Incorporating at least 1 visual aid, but you don't just want to incorporate it. You don't just want to like drop it in there. You have to address it at some point, because I have looked at instruction manuals where like there's just an image there and it's like, I don't know what this is showing me. I don't know what step it's tied to. If I was performing these instructions, I would be lost. So you have to meaningfully incorporate the visual aid. Page length, I'm liberal on. So I'm fine if your instruction manual is justifiably 3 to 4 pages, not including a references page. So, and that's because, and I'll show that I'm going to bring up the instruction manual student sample that I have. If you choose to integrate multiple visuals, and the way an instruction manual is formatted, because it tends to be like numbered or in bullet points, or maybe it's a variety of that, you're going to start getting onto different pages really quick. So as long as it's not super wordy, like there's a logical reason that makes sense for it to be more than 2 pages. And the 2 pages does not include the references page. So this is saying like your final should be no more than 2 pages and then a 3rd page would be the references page. Actually, it would be the 4th page, because your first page would really be the cover page. It would be like cover page, 2-page instruction manual, and then references page. I'm fine if the actual bulk of the instruction manual is 3 to 4 pages, and that's just because I'd rather people not sacrifice the quality. So if you feel like more visuals are helpful, then that's fine. If that makes it longer, that's okay. Following the principles of rhetorically effective design, and that has to do with how you actually set up and format the instruction manual itself, and also not forgetting the APA format, and not forgetting that reflection memo. So how this should be set up is, and I'll go over that when I pull up the student sample. And then, as I said before, remembering that to use that proper memo formatting when you do your reflection memo of when you reflect on your process of crafting the instruction manual final submission. Okay, so I'm going to pull up the student sample. This is the one that I posted on Canvas. So this was a well-crafted example of an instruction manual, and you can see that the student has a cover page. So in theory, you should have cover page, instruction manual, references page, reflection memo. That's the organization. for this, but you cannot forget your APA formatting because we are still in an academic environment. So even though you're asked to be doing like formatting within formatting, because you're doing instruction manual formatting within APA formatting, and then you have memo formatting within APA formatting. So you're being asked to do like 3 different types of formatting. But so you need to make sure that you remember all of those. So they have their what's it called again? Sorry, cover page. Your cover page is never your cover page and your references page. And if you have something like a reflection member, those are never considered part of like the page count of anything that you're ever given. They're what we call paratextual. They're outside of the text. And they're just necessary for context and format. This person set up their entire thing like a memo. That's fine if you want to do that. So there might be like 2 memos. Like I'm fine with that format. They have a useful, meaningful introduction here that talks about they're talking about establishing a secure Wi-Fi home network. So this sets up what as a reader I anticipate this instruction manual is going to do. So the only thing I think this introduction is really missing is a clearer identification of audience. So the second I look at this, I'm like, oh no, I'm not very good at like home network stuff. Am I going to be able to do this as a novice of this type of technology? So that's something I would probably have liked to have seen in this introduction is, what's the level of know-how a reader of this manual needs in order to be able to effectively understand the instructions and establish a secure Wi-Fi home network. Would I be able to do that? I don't know that from the introduction. That's the only thing that's missing from this introduction. And then they go directly into steps, which is perfect. And their steps are great. They offer a lot of visuals, which are really helpful for readers. They tend to go back and forth because it's a computer-based thing. They talk about, this is Windows versus Mac users. And things like this are helpful sometimes depending on the topic. Sometimes people will put in like safety warnings, and that's a good thing too, because that's something that is important. And especially if you're writing an instruction manual for a company where there's safety warnings, if those aren't in the instruction manual, that can be a lawsuit liability for the company. So you have to make sure that you have all those warnings or whatever they are laid out so that a user or consumer of that product cannot come back and say, your safety manual did not say anything about this, and therefore I hurt myself, and now I have all these medical bills, and now I'm going to sue you, right? So that's where things like that are really important. So I think they do a really good job on the length of their steps. Important for steps in instruction manual are those active verbs. So starting off with those active verbs, this one has an introductory phrase, but the active verb is here. So right, we have select, we have change. So those are all, hit. That's how you want to do instructions, is they should all start out with those present tense active verbs. And then they go through their various steps. They have a nice little conclusion. And then here is the reflection memo at the very end. And they do a wonderful job of splitting the memo into sections. And that's one of the things you always want to do to have those effective memos, even if they're really short, are the section headings are really useful, even if the purpose here is really short, but that's okay. I know this is a purpose, and then I know this is going to qualify that. So anytime you do a manual, sections are a really good thing to do. You just don't want it to be like one paragraph. And that is they don't have a references page, and that's just because this person used their own knowledge, what we call internal knowledge, to rate that. There's no, what do you call it, requirement for sources. I believe there are going to be requirement, if I remember correctly, there are requirement for sources for the technical report. And there's definitely required sources for the grant proposal project. You can use outside sources to help you with your instruction manual, although you don't have to. And a lot of times when students do this, they're using that internal knowledge, or they're using things that they already know, and it just the assignment just challenges them to, okay, well, how are you going to turn this into an instruction manual that your audience, whoever your audience is identified as, how can they understand that in the best, most effective way to recreate and re-simulate the instructions as to how you're stating them. So it does challenge your internal knowledge, but if you need to pull in outside sources, you can. And if you do, then you want to make sure you have a references page. Okay, I'm sorry. I think I've talked long enough. But I look forward to looking through your early drafts. If you haven't submitted your early draft yet, I have to manually assign you a peer review. So if you are late in submitting the early draft, just shoot me a message on Canvas, and then I will assign you a peer review to do. If you have any questions about peer feedback, if you have any questions about the final submission, and then once I provide my feedback, if you have any questions about my feedback in particular, don't hesitate to reach out. And I wish you all a wonderful weekend, and I will talk to you guys soon. Okay, bye-bye.